Okay, here we go again. So for the third session of this Immersion project presentation with Alex, Laura, and Gabrielle this afternoon, the jury will be Kayla Pichon, Timothée Cook from Lucid Online, and Hubert Bonnefond, who joined us really recently. And also for the reviewers, in addition to that, so Tim, Hubert, also Steve Como, and myself. Alex, you're going to open the floor this afternoon. You ready? I guess yes, you're going to have also your slides, can help. You have a timer, I see. Yes. If you want to move forward, I guess...
you take this to change.
Yes, you can take the keyboard as usual, and I guess you will see, when you're in a good area, you will see yourself.
Okay, perfect.
Floor is yours.
So the Mediterranean Sea is a very rich, one of the richest marine environment in the world, and an incredible hotspot for biodiversity. In certain countries, like Greece, for example, there have been already a lot of areas designated as protected. However, being designated as protected on paper doesn't necessarily mean that the management of the area is efficient for conservation. So the rising challenge nowadays is not how much we protect, but more how we protect these areas and how we make sure that the regulations we implement are aligned with the ecological and social context of the areas. This is why for my internship, I focus on exploring the ecological importance of Eremitis Peninsula in order to support the implementation of a locally managed marine area, while focusing on the ecosystem services provided by Posidonia oceanica meadows for the local fish fauna. So Posidonia oceanica is the only endemic seagrass species to the Mediterranean. It is threatened by a lot of anthropogenic activities like trawling, tourism, anchoring, and other threats. It is protected by a lot of international texts like the Barcelona Convention and the Berne Convention. And Posidonia meadows also offer a lot of ecosystem services, which are the benefits that are provided to the humans by the ecosystems, directly or indirectly. And for Posidonia oceanica, we can divide them in 4 different categories. So we have the provisioning services, so the meadows acting as feeding, spawning, and nursery ground for a lot of species. Then the regulating services, so this includes everything like limiting coastal erosion by trapping sediments in the roots, but also acting as a carbon sink. Then we have the cultural services, so the meadows acting as a playground for tourism and education. And then lastly, we have the supporting services, so the meadows acting as primary producer, participating in nutrient cycling, and also serving as habitats for fish, invertebrates, and other high trophic level species. Now, diving into the context of the study, you have here the Mediterranean Sea and here Corfu. Now, Eremitis is an area that is ecologically still pretty much intact. However, it is threatened by growing coastal development. So they want to implement a marina and then everything that goes with it for tourism, like bungalows and storage infrastructures. In this area, the meadow expands to about 60 hectares and stores about 12.5 tons of CO2. And to give you an image, it's about the yearly emission of 2,700 cars. The previous surveys have also recorded 215 species and also 5 habitats, so sandbanks, bays, also sea caves, but also Posidonia beds and rocky reefs. And the meadow across the whole area has different health levels that are indicators of the quality of the water. An LMMA, so the locally managed marine area, is a marine area managed at local level, and the implementations, the regulations can include like no-take zones, for example, or seasonal management and restrictions about anchoring, or the gear that is used for fishing. It is particularly suited for areas where the local community depends a lot on the marine resources and where the local community support is very important for the success of the LMMA. So this is why in Eremitis it is preferred to implement an LMMA in contrast to a traditional MPA, because Greece has already attained the ecological, the conservation target of 30 by 30, so 30% of the sea protected by 2030. So there would be no political driver to implement an MPA. Also, implementing a Natura 2000 site would be a far more complex and slow process. So to be able to implement protection efficiently and in a rapid way, this is why an LMMA was chosen. The data collection for assessing the fish community was done through underwater visual sensors over 7 sampling sites across the whole area. So it was 2 divers swimming along a 25 long meter transect, 4 meters wide during the 4th season of 2024. And this was done above the habitats of Posidonia meadows and rocky reefs, and then also at different depth ranges. To include the local community, we interviewed a few local people to assess their opinion and how they view fishing and conservation. Now, looking at the abundance of fish in the area, we can see a clear difference in abundance between the 2 habitats, with rocky reefs reporting a higher abundance than Posidonia reefs. And then there is also significant difference between the different sites in abundance and the different seasons. However, the different depth ranges, so 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and 20 plus meters, there was no significant differences in abundance. The Posidonia meadow showed to have a richer and a more even community as rocky reefs, and they also supported a higher proportion of juvenile fish than rocky reefs. For the maturity analysis, we can see that across the whole area, it's mostly populated by immature fish. And then to have an idea of the general structure of the community, I made a multivariate analysis. So you can see there's slight clustering between the habitats and the seasons, however, also very strong overlapping. So it shows that there is differences within the habitats and within the seasons, but we should be careful in interpreting those results. Now, looking at the trophic levels, the community is highly dominated by low to mid level trophic species. And again, there is significant difference across the seasons, with winter supporting higher trophic level species. And there was also this significant difference in the ranges. However, the habitats and the different sites did not show any significant difference between the trophic levels. Now, looking at the biomass, again, rocky reef supports a higher biomass than Posidonia meadows. And again, this was aligning with the abundance results, with a higher abundance between the different sites, biomass between the different sites, and also between the different seasons. And again, no significant effect for the depth range. Again, multivariate analysis to try to analyze the global structure of the community. You can see clearer clustering for the habitat, for example. But again, just as for the abundance, it is still overlapping. So again, even looking at the biomass, we should be careful how we interpret those results. Now, to see which species were driving the differences between the different habitats in biomass, I conducted a simple analysis. So those species were mainly responsible together about like 80% of the difference between the habitats, and then some of those same species are also responsible for the difference in biomass between the different sites. And if we look at the questionnaire results, so most of them were recreational fishers, and consciously targeted only one species that I mentioned in the previous slide. And even if their perception of the existing regulations about fishing in their area are 50-50 good impact and 50-50 low negative or neutral impact, most of them would still be willing to support future regulations about fishing and anchoring to protect Posidonia meadows. Now, this is the results for only 10 answers, because we only got 10 answers for the questionnaire. It is not enough to portray a global view of the community, but so this comes as a limit for this project, alongside with only sampling during 1 year for the underwater sampling, underwater visual census. Yeah. But however, all the results we have, they still show that habitat is the main ecological driver of the difference in the fish assemblages. So we have the rocky reefs showing a higher abundance in biomass, and the Posidonia showing higher proportion of juvenile fish and a more even and stable community. Then Serpa was identified as the main ecological hotspot of the whole peninsula, and the seasons align with the known Mediterranean recruitment and reproductive cycles. Then looking at the community dominated by low trophic level species, they indicate a very balanced ecosystem because they're very important, for example, for regulating algae and making sure there's not too much of it, so the light can still penetrate the water and like photosynthesis and all of that. And then the answers we got for the questionnaire support strong willingness for conservation. Now, this leads to the following recommendations. So we would recommend focusing on Posidonia for the habitat protection. However, it is important that we do not forget the rocks, as they have also their ecological importance. Then it is recommended to implement a size-based management for Serpa and seasonal management also to align with the peak recruitment period. And then to make sure that the community stays involved and included, to make sure they participate to the management of the future LMMA. And this would also ensure the long-term success of this LMMA. This brings me to my conclusion that in Eremitis Peninsula, there is the fish population is strongly structured by habitat and season, with strong patterns and abundance and biomass, and that while we wanted to focus only on Posidonia, well, Posidonia and rocky reefs are very complementary, and so we can't really forget one to protect only the other because well, they go hand in hand. The local ecological knowledge questionnaire also showed that even, well, we only had 10 answers, but again, most of them would be supporting conservation. So it would make Eremitis Peninsula the perfect area for an LMMA. Thank you all for listening. And I want to thank also my supervisor and IC for hosting this internship, and then the Mares team and all of my friends for supporting me throughout this process.
So we're going to open the floor for questions, starting maybe with you, Timothée.
Thank you, Christophe. Thanks, Alix. Thanks for this very interesting presentation. So to the point, I have the honor to have been given the task of reading and reviewing your report. So you've presented loads of results, and so there were a lot, and it was kind of difficult to remember all of those. So I'll again have the opportunity to look at these in detail, and I'm really looking forward to that. So I guess I should focus on your presentation on that particular topic of the sheer amount of results you presented. this is more like a comment. I'd advise, perhaps in the future, focus on just a few of the results. Try not to show everything that you did during your work, because there's a rule of thumb where, during a presentation, if you're not going to really present a figure, a graph, and explain it, and just rushing it through the slides is not really something I would advise. But that's a really easy thing to fix. On that topic as well, here's another tip. This is for your first figure, which, if you remember, is how do you say in English? Anyways, it's these little histograms with maybe if you can put it on your screen, right? Yeah. So I was trying to figure out why I couldn't see any difference between the. It's not that. Sorry, it's the histogram. Yeah. Box plot. Thank you, Christophe. Boîte à mustache box, and so on. All those terrible names. So, okay, this one, and the previous one, or the one following. If you have a look, yeah. So if you're trying to present differences between treatments or situations, ecological habitats, and so on, basically looking at this is like, oh, there's no difference. So you have to look at the stats, blah blah blah. So here's my tip, because this is a really easy fix. There's something called a break, and you can put a break. So you keep your scale on your y-axis, and so everybody can see where your data goes to. But you throw in a break, and it allows you to expand the bottom part, so you can actually visualize if there are differences or not. Because if you can't visualize those differences, is this graph important? Do I really need to show it? Well, you've got so many results, you've worked so much, you don't need to impress us with loads of results. Okay, enough with that. I'll just have one question. So LMMA, I'm really interested by the use of that term, because it's a term that usually applies, to Madagascar in particular, but not only. And so, at Blue Seas, we've worked quite a bit in the Med with marine protected areas, and I think it's the first time I've heard that word applied to LMMA. How is that designation going to fit into the sort of wider fields of designations in the Med, which already are sufficiently diverse and confusing at this point? So what is this going to change? How can it be formally recognized? What does it add? How is it different from, let's say, another initiative? And finally, how would you compare it to what's being considered, let's say, as the reference for comparing marine protected areas, which is the MPA guide, which is based on regulations rather than on the IUCN designations? Thanks.
Well, I would say that maybe in the Med Sea, especially for me, when I went to Greece, I saw that, we live in a big city here. Everything is very developed here, but there are still communities in the Mediterranean that are still strongly relying on marine resources, and especially fishing. And so it would be, I think, very interesting to implement more LMMAs in the Med Sea, because the MPAs are based on regulations, and so sometimes they're not really looking at the case-to-case, how it could be more beneficial for a particular area to be managed. And I think if we do implement more LMMAs, maybe it could be more complicated, but then again, if we really take into account into consideration the local needs for the different communities, I think it could just be better. If that answers your question.
Okay, no, I there was no expected answer. I was just curious to know why it was used in this case, and I actually find such initiatives probably a lot more relevant than trying to formally designate some MPAs the way that it's being done. And in many countries, these initiatives are still waiting for the government's approval. So But
then again, if you also take more into consideration the local people needs. If you just implement an MPA, then it's just like it's there, and it's the government kind of telling you it's there, and you have to respect all of these regulations. But if you take into account all the local communities, then they would feel more included and would maybe participate more in managing this area. And then I think it would be more efficient if you have people's participation for that kind of stuff.
I think Timothée is free, so we can go to you with that.
Thank you very much. For sure, you put too much information. This is clearly a big. It's sad because we understand you did a great job, and the way to present it, it's very hard to follow. Especially, I'm not specialist, so especially for me, just I was just running behind you.
It's noted.
How did you participate to collect the data?
Unfortunately not. I was supposed to participate in collecting the answers for the questionnaires, but then there was probably some communication problems, and it was not the right time for the people we were gonna work with, and they were also supposed to do a workshop in Corfu, and it's just like it didn't align their schedule. And then I see, and then they just reported this field trip to September, and then I was here in September.
Do you see some way to improve the way to collect data to be more accurate, etc.
For the questionnaires?
Not for the data collected. Okay, you did not participate, but from what you know, and the way to collect data under the sea, it's just divers that not what they see. Is it the good way? Can you be critical on this system?
So under visual sensors is a beautiful technique to assess the fish population if you know fish species. So first of all, there's this. And then this is also why the transects were only 25 meters long. It's not that long, but then again, it allows you to like focus on your work and not be carried away. But then, for example, also in Posidonia meadows, under visual sensors can be limited by the small fish swimming through the meadows. And then when it's in the meadows, well, you don't see them and you can miss a lot. So that would be a limitation also. But then to collect data under the sea, there's also a lot of studies that use the BROVs, the beta remote underwater videos, which is also very interesting. But for that kind of technique, you need a flat ground. And if you put a BROV in a meadow, you'll see leaves, and that's it. So I don't think that would be appropriate for that. So I think visual sensors is the best, but still limited. There's also, there's going to be different, there's at least 2 divers. So maybe if they see a fish school, someone will say there's 20 of them, and then the other one will say, oh no, it's 40. So it is good, but I don't know how to do that.
Maybe I'm curious. So, as an external person to ask a question, have you tried? Here, you're looking at abundance. One way we try to avoid that is to have a look to the presence absence, for example. Have you tried that approach?
I have not.
Sorry, I'm an external.
That would be interesting.
Hubert, you have an additional question? I'm sure Kayla will have, but Hubert,
just a last one, slide 12. You conclude on there is some difference. For instance, the green for Posidonia and Reef, you see difference. Why? There is in the box plot. Do you, for instance, in the Shannon index, why do you see difference? The box plot seems very have the same value, no? For me, they are the same value. So if they have not the same value, why?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
You're right. Posidonia have higher diversity in this.
Yes. It is higher. A little bit.
A little bit. but very little bit.
Maybe also once again, what do you mean? Like, is it like we see a difference, a tiny one, but is it significant? And with what? Yes.
I know it is significant for the evenness. I don't remember.
I invite you to mark that on the plot so that if you forget, it's still there. Okay, we can continue. Go ahead with Kayla.
I'm going to continue all these congratulations on your presentation. I agree, it's a lot of work. It shows that you did a lot of stuff, but it's maybe too much for a 15 minutes presentation. I will continue on the stats and how you present stuff. If you go to slide 15, can you explain to me what was done here and how technically how you did this kind of analysis? First, what it is and how you did it.
I run my data set to an MDF code on our studio. And so it's supposed to show us like if for example, the habitats are like strongly differently structured.
What each dot represents.
It's transect. Each point is
a transect. Okay. And what was your data set that you feed on to have this kind of flux? Where were the columns, for example?
So I had the species name, the abundance, the transect, the depth range, the season in which it was observed, the habitat.
Okay. Yeah.
And the sites also.
Okay. Because I'm kind of missing the explanatory variables that allow you to differentiate kind of besides only attributing to habitat or the season, maybe also what it allows you to have this differentiation between the transects could also be helpful. And you also mentioned that you observe some clusters. How you determine these kind of clusters?
Like if a lot of colored points in the same area.
So you did not run hierarchical, for example, to identify clusters.
You run what?
A hierarchical clustering method. Have you heard of that? Okay, it's okay. And I think most of the questions that I had were already asked.
Okay.
Maybe because I'm not familiar with it, not fully familiar with it. What do you mean by stable biodiversity? By the end of your presentation, you stated something about stable biodiversity over Posidonia, I think.
Yes. So the diversity metrics, they show that there is, I always confuse myself, so I'm going to take a second. So the species found over Posidonia meadows, there is not one species with a very high abundance and then the other with like 3 individuals. The fish abundance is equally distributed across the species.
Okay, does not mean that the biodiversity remains stable over time, but it's you have equal levels.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And the last question, if I may. Here, if I understand correctly, you were taking into account mostly fish as biodiversity.
Yes, I focused on fish.
What don't you think it could be also interesting to have other species? What would you propose for?
Invertebrates.
Which kind of invertebrate?
So
which kind of invertebrates?
Crustaceans, for example. Okay. Yes. I will also focus on more predatory species.
Okay.
To see how this would have an influence.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna understand. Thank you.
Good. You have a few minutes for additional questions on your sides. If you, yeah, of course, Matilda.
No, I was wondering if, because you said that you didn't do the survey when you were there, but did you have any chance to talk to fishermen or local people and see how they view these protected areas and if they were excited for them to be created or managed?
So for this specific topic of the internship, no, but I did join IC on another field trip for another project, also in another island, and the other side of Greece in the Aegean Sea. And then for this, I had the chance to participate in being on a fishing boat and then assessing the fish species that they would get in the nets. And well, language barrier was also a thing, so it was mainly translated. But they seemed very understanding of the fact that yes, they fish. Yes, we are working for conservation, but they seem very understanding of the fact that our work could benefit them, because if they also don't know how the fish stock look, they don't know how to adapt their fishing. And then again, they also know that when we come on their boats to assess this fish population, we're not there to like judge them or anything. We're just there to like literally look at what is in the nets. And I think if the communication is done well, you can really build a trusting and strong relationship between fishers and conservation workers.
For last question, anybody? Timothy, if you want, last one, short.
Thanks, Christophe. No, I'm okay. I'm gonna
Good.
I'm gonna have my hands full reading this.
Okay, good. So, Alex, I think we're good. Thank you again. And good. And we're going to move to the next speaker today. With Laura Ketche, we are going to talk about Posidonia again, because once again, we're in the middle of a Mediterranean ecosystem and coastal functioning session. Effects of climate change on the carbon storage capacity of Posidonia oceanica meadows. I'm good, yes, that is the title. Yes, wait a minute. And when you're ready, it's yours.
Okay, thank you. So hello and welcome to my presentation on the impact of climate change on the carbon storage capacity of Posidonia oceanica meadows. I know this title is a bit long, so let's go through this step by step. First of all, of course, we're focusing on Posidonia, but then more specifically, we're looking at its carbon storage capacity now. Why are those two interesting to look at? Well, first of all, we know Posidonia is a very important habitat in the Med Sea. It is endemic to the Med Sea and pretty widespread, as you can see on the map. But it is also in drastic decline. More than a third has been lost over the past 50 years already. And it is a very important habitat for many species in the Med Sea. And it is also important for us humans because it serves us with important ecosystem services. For example, with climate change mitigation, which brings me to the next point, that is its carbon storage capacity. The carbon storage capacity is the quantity of carbon a system can hold and prevent from being re-emitted. And therefore, it really defines if a system is a carbon sink or a carbon source. Now, for Posidonia, as it is today, we know that it is a carbon sink, a very important one. And that's why it is classified as a blue carbon ecosystem. And this is mainly because it has a very high primary production rate, and it builds up these huge mats that can reach up to several meters in height and really trap carbon for several thousands of years. And the annual sequestration rate of Posidonia meadows is more than 1 million tons of carbon, which is huge. But Posidonia doesn't occur isolated in nature, but it's always in a big community. So this is why I added this word meadows. to know that we're focusing on the whole community. Why is it important to include the community? Especially in our study, we focused a lot on that because, well, as I said, Posidonia is a very important habitat for hundreds of other species. And as you can see in the schematic, even on one single leaf, we have a huge variety of different species. And they all also metabolize, so they all also have an impact on the carbon storage capacity, which is quite important. Now that we know how complex the system is and how important this is, we want to know how it's going to change, possibly with climate change. So in our study, we focused on the two drivers, ocean warming and ocean acidification, and we used the variables temperature and pH for that. Now, these variables have been looked at in the past already and their influence on Posidonia, but mainly people focused on the impact on only the plant itself and didn't include the community. So this is one reason why we did the study, to gain more knowledge on that. And this leads to my first research question, which is how do pH and temperature individually influence carbon storage capacity of the whole community? And then often they also only focus on single drivers, but as in climate change, we're going to have at least the two of them together. We want to see the combined effect of the two drivers on this carbon storage capacity. So how did we address these questions? We conducted a long-term multi-driver experiment for 3 months in this spring and summer this year. We put an intact piece of a Posidonia meadow into an aquarium, and then we had 8 of these aquaria. And we exposed them to 3 different treatments. The first treatment is just raise temperatures by 4 degrees, which is the expected temperature change until the year 2100 in the Bay of Villefranche. And that is also where we took the Posidonia pieces from, the meadow pieces, sorry. Then the second treatment is lowered pH. We lowered it by 0.255 units, which is also what is expected for this bay in the year 2100. And then our third treatment is the combined effect. So that's the climate change scenario. And then, of course, we also have a control group. And all of them had two replicate aquaria. Now, how did these aquaria look like in detail? As I said, in the middle, we had a piece of the Posidonia meadow. And to make it even more realistic, we had some bare sediment on one side and some dead mat on the other side to represent really the whole ecosystem. Then we had always inflow of water that came directly from the bay and that could be heated. And then we also had a CO2 bubbler for the treatments that had changed pH. And then we had a bunch of sensors that measured all the time. But we also did active measurements, which were the incubations, we called them. For these incubations, we cut the inflow so that no more water would come in, and so that the metabolites could be enriched in the water. And then we could measure the changes over time. And in this, now I'm just going to focus on dissolved oxygen. So we measured the changes in dissolved oxygen concentrations from the beginning to the end of each incubation. And we did incubations in light and in dark conditions, because in light conditions, we see the changes that are a result of photosynthesis and respiration. And in dark conditions, they are only a result of respiration, because we don't have photosynthesis in the dark. And then if we combine these two, we can calculate the net community production, which is what is left after you subtract what all the organisms respire from what they have produced. And if you have a positive NCP, so net community production, it means that you have more photosynthesis than respiration, so more production. And if it is negative, you have more respiration. So that would be a carbon source then. Now let's see what we found. In this first graph, we have the control at the x-axis, not the treatments at the x-axis, and then the NCP as the response variable. And the 2 data points each are the replicates for each control. And since we only have so few data points, I couldn't do any statistics on this one, but we can still see trends. So for the control, we see that we have a positive NCP, which is what we would expect because the Posidonia meadows are a carbon sink. Then for the lower pH treatments, we had a high variability. For the temperature treatment, we see a decrease in productivity. And very interestingly, for the combined treatment, we see a higher productivity. And this is interesting for 2 reasons. First of all, it shows that the two single variables have a synergistic interaction. So if you just add the effect of the 2, they would have a lower effect than the effect we see when we just look at the combined treatment. And it is also very interesting that in a climate change scenario, we would see a higher productivity. So to understand this result a bit better, we're going to compare the incubations a bit more. So what happened during light incubations, what happened during dark incubations. Here again, we have the treatments on the x-axis, and this time we have the DO fluxes on the y-axis. And in light conditions, you see that they're positive because they produce more dissolved oxygen, and in the dark conditions, they take up more. So the y-axis is negative. So what did we see? In light conditions, we don't see any clear effect, and also statistically, there was no effect. And in dark conditions, we do see an effect, and also for the it's also for the combined treatment. So this confirms what we saw earlier, and it explains it a bit, because now that it is only in the dark conditions, we see a less negative value here compared to the other treatments. So this means that the combined treatment leads to less respiration. So when we combine what we just saw, first of all, we saw that the combined treatment leads to enhanced productivity. And then we saw that this enhanced productivity is mainly explained by limited respiration. So now that we understood the effect on the whole community a bit, let's look at the plant productivity so that in the end we can compare the two and see if the effect we just saw is also mirrored in the plant productivity, or if maybe the reason for it is somewhere else. So the research question I'm asking is, do the responses of the plant productivity differ from the ones we just saw on community metabolism? So what are the methods we used? As a proxy for the productivity, we used leaf growth, and we used the punched hole method, which is as easy as it sounds. You just punch in the beginning of the experiment a hole at the base of the leaf, and then you just let it grow, and the hole grows with the leaf. And at the end of the experiment, so after 3 months, you just measure the distance from the base of the leaf to the hole, and then you get how many centimeters it grew. So what did we see here? Here again, we have the treatments, and then on the y-axis, we have the leaf growth in centimeters. And we see here, differently from what we saw before, that both single drivers have a negative effect on leaf growth, which is also significant. And in contrast, the combined treatment does not show any impact compared to the control group. And this also shows us that there is an antagonistic interaction between the two single drivers here, because we have no impact in the combined treatment. So if we now compare the responses on the plant level to the community level, we see that in temperature, we have the same effect, but in pH, the pH treatment and for the combined treatment, the responses differ, which is quite interesting. and also the interaction between the single variables differ. So what do we take away from this? We first saw that plant productivity and community metabolism respond differently to the treatments. And this leads to the conclusion that the positive responses we saw earlier are not explained by the plant's metabolism. Now let's have a quick look at the limitations and what could be done more. Even though we conducted a long-term study compared to what had been done before, it's still limited in time. So we're only looking at one season. It was during the productive season. So looking at other seasons would be interesting as well to see the whole picture. And it also is only the result for one bay. And in the literature, they say that responses can be highly variable depending on the location where you conduct the experiments. Then we also looked only on 2 drivers of climate change, but of course there are many more. And it would be interesting to include local drivers, for example, like turbidity. We had quite a small number of replicates. And so to enhance the strength of the statistical analysis in the end, it would be good to have more replicates and to also validate what we saw in these experiments with in situ measurements would be cool. And then it would also be super interesting to look at other species more specifically to understand a bit who might be winners or who might be losers because of climate change, and so how the communities might shift in the future, the composition. So to conclude, to come back to what we saw, first of all, in the beginning, we saw that on a community level, climate change in this bay might lead to enhanced productivity. And this enhanced productivity is mainly explained in our studies, at least, by a reduction in respiration. And the positive responses we see on the community level are not explained by changes in the plant's metabolism. That's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Laura. Maybe we can start with you, Kayla, if you want. So we finish this before we go to
sure.
Hubert after.
I have a question. So if I understand, well, congrats on your presentation first. So if I understood correctly, you've had an exposure time of 3 months, and you measure at the end of the experiment.
Yeah, the leaf growth.
And but overall, you did multiple follow-ups of the measurements over the time, or it was a single time point?
For the leaf growth, only at the end, because then we had to remove them to measure.
Okay, maybe I missed it, but did you see any difference over time in the productivity or even in any change over time?
You mean in general and not plant growth?
For every parameter you observe, even other things that you've had an idea on, did you see any changes over time?
We did have changes in the aquarium. We had a lot of little algae that grew and that increased a lot during the study time. So that might also have influenced the results, actually.
Can you link it to your final key takeaways? As you say that you saw increased algae growing in your tank. Can you link it to one of your takeaways?
It could be. I wanted to say it could be part of the community change, but we actually saw them in all the aquaria.
Yeah.
So even in the control aquarium. And I don't know.
I think I was the third one specifically, because you can say takeaways, positive response, you don't see it's not due to positive metabolism. If you have other things that are also developed here.
Yeah, I don't think that it's because of this algae, because we saw the changes mainly in the respiration. And I would guess that the algae would contribute even more to photosynthesis rather than respiration, maybe.
They also respire.
Yeah, that's true. But since it's a reduction in respiration, yeah, maybe they respire less. That could be. But since we saw them in all the flumes, and we don't have
In which proportion do you?
we couldn't measure it in the end. Yeah, because they attach to everything so tightly that we couldn't separate it from the rest. That is for sure a limitation.
If you want to move to another way, I think I was something else.
Okay, Hubert.
Thank you.
Thank you. You have some information about the pH regulation, because how can you regulate so accurately the difference between the two pH? Because the difference is only 0.2 units, if I remember. It's it's a very small difference. So how did you manage to do that?
Maybe I go back to the right one. But we had sensors in the flumes that would measure all the time the pH of the flumes. And when I say flume, I mean aquarium. And then when it increased or decreased significantly, it would send a signal to the CO2 bubbler that would then start or stop. But I don't know the technical details about that.
No, but and are you sure that, because you have a lot of noise concerning pH, the result about around the pH, and you are sure about the regulation? It's not so easy to regulate pH. So what is your? You have some insight on this aspect?
Yeah, I think for the
so especially due to the very small difference you are looking for.
It might be a limitation as well, but I think for the incubations I included in my analysis, we checked that it looked quite good. Yeah, because we had to exclude a lot of the incubations because they had some issues either with temperature or with pH.
To check these aspects.
Yeah.
Maybe another question. You conclude that pH reduce growth of Posidonia. You conclude temperature reduce growth of Posidonia, and the combined effects, there is no impact. Okay. Do you have some biological explanation, or at least some hypothesis to explain that? Because it's absolutely not obvious to generally. You can have some antagonist effect, but as the two parameters goes in the same way, not so obvious to see antagonist or something. So do you have some explanations? Can be a hypothesis, can be, of course, it will not be demonstrated, but have you think about that?
Yeah, so one thing I read in the literature is that with a higher, if temperatures are higher, that pH could somehow counterbalance it, because sometimes plants would be CO2 limited, and then if they had more CO2 available, they could grow better even if it's warmer. So that could be one explanation, but then also other studies said that this is not a real effect they found, so it's a bit unsure. But that is really the only thing I found why it could even each other out. Thank you.
So, Timothée.
Yes, sorry. Thanks. Thank you very much, Laura. This was a very good presentation and extremely well illustrated. So congrats, well done. I liked how prudent you were considering sample sizes. For me, it was a teaser. I was a bit frustrated. So these questions were asked already, like, you didn't sort of try to come up with explanations as to the difference between the plant level and the community level. But it feels like it would have been nice to hear about, even though you are prudent with your sample size, with the different potential methodological issues around the setup and so on, it's like, why? We want to hear why. So that was the only thing I had to say. But it's results should speak for themselves sometimes, and this is what it is. So having said that, about the temperature. So you increased it to +4. So is the +4 with the IPCC forecast for sea surface temperature in that area in 2100? Is that correct?
No, it's based on a not published study yet, but in the Bay of Villefranche, they have a buoy where they measure temperature and pH and many parameters all the time for many years already. And based on this trend, they calculated what it's going to be in this exact bay for the year 2100.
Well, I mean, the IPCC is fed by local data. So, I mean, presumably this would end up anyways being part of the IPCC model at one point. But okay, so that's a +4. So according to your knowledge, how is that +4 calculated? So what does it mean +4? Let's think about the IPCC, which focuses on air temperature in the first 100 meters above the ground. How, first of all, what is forecasted today as a change in temperature, and how is it calculated?
So it's just based on data that has been collected until now. So it is still quite unsure about maybe feedback. What's the word?
Loops.
Feedback loops, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, is it like the maximum increase in temperature that we'll see? Is it the minimum increase? Is it an average?
I think it's rather conservative.
Well, it's conservative depending on your scenario, on your representative conservation pathway. It's actually an average. It's an average increase in air temperature at a point in time in the future that we forecast using these models. So I'm assuming this +4 is the same. So for me it's a massive increase in sea surface temperature. I mean, that's a big change for something as buffered as water. But my point is, so when you get an average increase in temperature and you plug that into a physiological model, you're only getting a part of the information. So if you do this for heat stress studies on animals, for example, you're not getting the whole picture because animals or plants get exposed to heat stress through heat waves, for example. And if you average your increase in temperature over a year, or your temperatures over a year, you're not seeing that. So my point is, and I think you know where I'm getting at, is that, well, what could be missing from this experimental setup?
Yeah, for sure. You're talking about heat waves, and that was also a consideration to take to maybe in 1 or 2 flumes also create heat waves and see what happens there. But then it was too complicated, and also we wouldn't have had any replicates probably. So it was a bit too much for the setup. But what is also interesting about this study is that it was constantly linked to the changes in the bay. So with the water coming in for the control treatment, we really always had the temperature of the bay at the same time. And then we constantly adjusted the temperature that on the higher temperature treatments to exactly this, so that we always had a difference of 4 degrees. So at least it really followed the natural variability of temperature. Yeah, but of course we didn't include any heat waves or like super hot temperatures in summer. We didn't reach that.
Okay, cool, excellent. So I look forward to reading your report as well.
Thank you.
Coming back to UK, no, Timothée, Hubert, oh là là, I got, sorry.
It's okay.
Hubert, it's okay. So we can open the floor to Andrea.
Very nice presentation, Laura. I had a question. where did the Posidonia oceanica that you use in the tanks came from? Because we've heard like in the mat also, because we know this takes a lot of time to grow, and we know Posidonia is one protected and it takes a lot of time to grow. So how did you manage to get, and what, maybe do you know the size of the fronts, or yeah, can you tell us more of this actual setup of your experiment?
Yeah, we took it from just right in front of the research station in the Bay of Villefranche. And of course, they had permits for that. It was pieces that were about the size, maybe. So we had 8 of these. And then the dead mat was about the size, and the sediment as well. Yeah, so it wasn't huge, but yeah.
I'm actually interested.
I'm curious if they've done similar studies of Posidonia in the wild with these variables, and if the results that you found in the lab corroborate with that.
Not yet, but they're doing it right now. Yeah, they want to validate the experimental results and are planning to do the same setup, but in the sea, which is going to be quite difficult, I think, but super interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
We heard a lot about turbidity in our courses, and now I wondered, how is it a local driver of climate change?
I think that in some places it can be enhanced, maybe if you have more more ice melting in the spring, for example. So you have more river discharge that would bring more sediments with it. For example, yeah. Yeah.
In your experiment setup, I want to ask if you think there would be a difference in the reaction of the plant if the roots are exposed or if you submerge them. I think you did have the mats over the roots in your experiment. Or is that,
I didn't understand.
when you set up your experiment, you set up the Posidonia and then with the mat already. Do you think the reaction to the different parameters you tested would be different if the roots were more exposed or more submerged, for example, also in sediments?
Good question. I'm not so sure about the roots. I would guess that maybe for the microorganisms living in the roots, it would make a big difference. And we also conducted small incubations on the sediment itself. And the data isn't really available yet, but my supervisor said that he did see big changes just from the sediment as well. So we know that the microorganisms also contribute a big part to the carbon chemistry in general. So it would for sure make a difference, but I don't know if for the roots it would make a big difference.
You have last question. What about on the jury or you?
I have a last question. You had unlimited funding and a lot of time. What would you do? What would you do different?
I would for sure use more aquaria to have more replicates. That would be the first thing. And then if we really had everything we wanted, we could do include more drivers at the same time. So maybe also simulate heat waves or storm surges or turbidity as well. So just include more to have a more realistic.
Wouldn't you include more measures directly on? Because here you measure metabolism. There's other things that could be measured, or do you think that's enough to conclude on your question?
We did a bunch of other measurements as well. So for example, we also sampled the CN ratio of the leaves, but that isn't analyzed yet. And also the nutrient concentrations and total alkalinity, so that we could measure together with the pH, we could calculate the DIC fluxes, the soft inorganic carbon fluxes. And I think maybe using everything we did, that would be enough. But maybe only focusing on the soft oxygen mat. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And so, to conclude this first day of presentations, Gabriel Delmar Castaño, with no surprise, we're going to talk about Posidonia, the star for this afternoon. So for this presentation, Timothée is not going to be able to be part of the jury. And I guess you will explain. And so, as usual, in this situation, I will take over.
Okay.
Ready?
So, did you know that by 2050, 211 homes are going to be lost only in the Paco region due to coastal erosion? Well, this is coastal erosion. It's basically the loss of sediment due to wave energy, but also currents. This impacts or generates highly economic losses in coastal communities. For instance, CEREMA conducted a study in 2024, which the result was that basically by 2050, there's going to be 5,200 homes lost in France, and this represents a loss of 1.2 billion euros. Therefore, some coastal municipalities have decided to implement some coastal protection structures, like these ones. These are hard structures that the goal is to attenuate wave energy and prevent coastal erosion. However, they are super expensive to maintain, super expensive to implement, and also they shift the natural formation of the coastline. Some other strategies, they don't focus in protection, but they rather focus on counterbalancing the loss of sediments. That's, for example, beach nourishment, which actually focus on dredging the seabed in areas offshore, and then bringing that sand to coastlines and putting that sand there and preventing the continued loss of sediments. So today, I'm actually going to focus only on nature-based solutions. So what is that? It's basically taking one ecosystem that is already there, and with that ecosystem, solving a problem from society. For protection, for coastal protection, we have three, the most important nature-based solution for coastal protection is mangroves, coral reefs, and salt marshes. And why is that? Basically, what they do is that they reduce the wave energy and they protect the coast from coastal erosion. So what can we use as a nature-based solution for coastal protection in the Med-Sea? We can use Posidonia oceanica. So as my colleagues mentioned, Posidonia oceanica is, how can I do it?
No worries.
It's magic button.
Okay. Yes, okay, I hope that this doesn't ruin my timing, but let's continue. So, as my colleague mentions, basically this is a seagrass that is endemic for the Mediterranean Sea, and it's located in depths between 10 to 40 meters. And it's very important for this project because it basically helps attenuating waves. So maybe we can consider this seagrass as a nature-based solution. However, right now it's super complex for coastal manager to include this species in coastal management program. And why is that? Because the information that we have right now, it's super technical and it's not easy to understand. Another problem that we have is that it's related to site-specific cases, and therefore it's not easy to scale it up to the whole Mediterranean coast. Therefore, my first research question is this one. Is it possible to identify general conditions for effective wave attenuation by Posidonia oceanica, and what are they? And the second question is, can we valorize the protective role of Posidonia to support cost-effective conservation? So since I have two research questions, I'm going to divide my presentation in these two questions. So first, we're going to take a look at the methodology for the first question, the results and the discussion, and then for the second one. So let's start. How I define these general conditions? I conducted a literature review, and for that, I established 4 research categories that I used as keywords too, and I limited this research to 2010 to 2025. First, I identify 53 relevant sources that then I put them in a literature database and I summarize them all to actually select the ones that will be useful to answer my first research questions. So from that, I came up with 25 sources to read. And while I was doing that, I also constructed a matrix with a list of questions that will let me to answer my main research question. From that, I actually only use 16 scientific papers to answer those questions that I established before, and therefore to propose my general conditions when Posidonia oceanica actually promotes wave attenuation. So here I'm proposing 9 general conditions. However, today we're only going to focus on the first 4. And why is that? Because they are the most important of the 9. And so let's start with the first one. When we talk about wave energy, it's very important also to talk about depth. And why is that? The energy that comes with a wave only can reach a certain limit in depth. Therefore, if we have a meadow that is farther in depth, this meadow is not going to be able to interact with the energy that is coming with the wave, and therefore the meadow is not going to be useful to promote wave attenuation. The second rule that I'm proposing here is related to the space that the meadow is occupying in the water column. So if we have a meadow that is occupying a lot of space, this is what we call the submergence ratio. It means that the meadow is going to be able to better interact with the energy that is coming with the waves. Therefore, higher attenuation is going to be helped, let's say. So for the third rule, it's related to density. So what is density in seagrass meadows? Is the number of individuals or the number of blades that we can have in a specific area. So if we have a higher density, we're going to have like a kind of like a barrier and larger cross-sectional areas that are going to create a higher dragging force and friction to the water and are going to slow down the energy that is coming with the wave. And then to finish, this is my last rule that I'm going to present today. Spatial distribution and landscaping affect the way that seagrasses can attenuate waves. So if we have like a huge wall of Posidonia, then what it's going to cause is actually that it's going to create like a step for the wave to increase the height. However, if we have broken stripes and also clusters, it's going to be better okay, to attenuate waves. So just to discuss, what I'm proposing here is a simplified way to assess the protective role of Posidonia oceanica, and it's also a baseline tool for conservation management. To apply these rules, we only need physical data that we can get from Copernicus, and we also need some ecological data. This is kind of a limitation that we have right now in order to apply our general conditions. And why is that? Because the information in ecological data that we have right now, it's case specific. So it's not easy to apply these general conditions to the whole Mediterranean coast. So let's continue to my second question. Can we valorize the protective role of Posidonia oceanica to support cost-effective conservation? So for that, I designed a financial model. So this is composed by 2 parts. The first one is the avoided cost of beach replenishment. But what is that? It's basically answering to a question. If Posidonia disappears, how much will local managers have to pay in order to replace the sand that is being lost? And then the second part of my model is going to be related to the cost of implementing some conservation measures to maintain the same state, the same protection state of Posidonia oceanica. So as parameter, I'm going to divide it in different aspects that I consider. So first is the amount of sediments that are being retained by Posidonia during storm events, because storm events are actually the ones that create more erosion. And then we have to analyze a specific area. Therefore, I added this parameter that is related to the length of the coastline that we want to target. Then, since we are calculating an economic model, we need to add something that assesses the cost of this. And for that, I use the cost of beach replenishment per cubic meter. For the second part of my model, I established as a conservation measure the implementation of an eco-mooring system, which basically targets the threat, no, the impact on Posidonia meadow regarding anchoring. So first, the first aspect that I took in consideration is that I needed to include the cost of installation, but also maintenance of the buoys. Then the cost of monitoring and enforcement, and also the potential revenues that local municipalities can get by renting these buoys. And also I wanted to test the model. So I chose this site, which is Almanar Beach. It's in the south of France, in the region of Yam. It's covered by 1,800 hectares of Posidonia meadows. And for that, I also choose to do 3 different scenarios with different costs of beach replenishment. And these are the results that I obtained. So as we can see here, these are the different costs of beach replenishment and how the model of the avoided cost will change regarding these costs. So as we can see here, the avoided cost ranges between 6.8 million to 8.6 million annually, showing that actually this region is saving a lot of money just because of the presence of Posidonia oceanica. The conservation measure, which was implemented in the Immersion, the cost that we obtained annually was 200,000 euros, which sounds a lot, but then if you compare it to the avoided cost, it's actually nothing. Other studies have also tried to valorize this protective role of Posidonia, and what they do is they actually use the replacement costs, which is quite different of what I did. But one of the articles that I read mentions that they obtained a cost for Posidonia meadow per hectare for this protective role of 3.6 thousand euros per year. And if I take my value and I convert it to a value per year and per hectare, I will obtain a range between 3.4 and 4.7 thousand euros, which is pretty similar of what was reported in this paper. Okay, my model still has some limitations. For example, the spatial scale. In order to test the model, I use the whole length of the coastline. However, Posidonia might not be protected the whole length. So in future scenario, we will need to only take the length of the coast that is actually being protected by Posidonia. And then another limitation is that I only took one conservation measure, which is the deployment of an eco-mooring zone. However, anchoring is not currently the main threat to Posidonia. It's actually coastal erosion, coastal development, and urbanization. So to improve the model, maybe we can also some solutions for this threat. So just a conclusion and a take-home message. I would like to go back to my first question. And it is possible to identify general conditions for effective wave attenuation by these species, and what are they? Well, yes, it is possible because wave attenuation is not random. And actually, it follows some parameters which are related to the submergence ratio, the density and the length of the meadow, and the landscape. And for my second question, can we valorize the protective role of Posidonia to support cost-effective conservation? Yes, we can do it. And this protective service actually can be valued up to 4.7 thousand euros per hectare per year. And therefore it's worth it to invest in conservation measures to maintain this protective role. So just to close up, I really like to say thank you to my to Blue Seats. They were really welcoming with me, and especially to my supervisor, which I don't know if he's still here today. But yeah, he was always open to help me with questions and also help me detangle my thoughts. That's pretty, awesome.
Okay, so we're going to open the floor for questions. With you, if you want, Hubert. Go to Kayla.
Thank you for the presentation. Just maybe to start a small question, how can you say a source is relevant without to read it? How can you say a source is relevant without to read it? You say that you have 53 sources relevant, but you read only 25. So it's.
But yeah, what I did, yeah, is that's true. I'm sure. No, but what I did is like make they're relevant. Of course they are, but maybe not relevant to answer my question. And how did I do that? It's not like I just looked at the title. I actually went through it and I look at the figures, I look at the discussion, and then I was like, okay, maybe they're talking more about, let's say, tides and currents. And my topic, it's only focused on waves. So that's, for example, one of the main filters that I use to, not take in consideration those papers, but of course, relevant.
Other questions, the link between your two questions, it's not so easy for me to follow. Okay, your first question, you answer quite well. The second question, you suggest several methods to produce middle. Some is your specific anchors, and other is to cultivate and to implement this solution. I'm not sure to see, because a protective service is a cost. It's you price that, but it's not the money. It's not created anywhere. So it's just the money we will avoid to expend. To not protect. This is.
Exactly. This is for that. So I wanted to translate the value, this ecosystem value, let's say, into monetary terms, because sometimes it's easy to understand, and for people that are actually not in marine science, let's say. So this value that I'm showing here is the value that they are actually saving today. And then if we destroy the Posidonia that it's located in that specific beach that I mentioned, they will be losing per hectare this amount of money. So that's the value right now. Of course, they're not gaining money today. They're just avoiding this cost right now. That's why it's the avoided cost.
And for the place where there is nothing, do you have some suggestion?
Not Posidonia?
Not Posidonia. Because there is nothing to protect, but the coast erosion is there.
Is there, I guess, they can use some other strategies. You mean to valorize or to actually protect the coast?
To protect the coast, because it's main topics here.
I think so. That depends on where you're located geographically speaking. But
let's say in Mediterranean.
In the Mediterranean, I would say like some places have, for example, dunes, and dunes are, even if they're not in the water, there is still a mechanism that naturally protects the coastline. So I will say that. There's also some intertidal seagrasses, and they show to produce more wave attenuation than the ones that are submerged. So I will say that also.
But also, my question is a link between Posidonia, because you demonstrate that to be efficient, Posidonia, this is your first question, to be efficient, Posidonia has to have some condition in depth, etc., etc. So can you translate that to active action to protect the coast?
Yeah, like to places that there's no Posidonia, or you mean?
Places where there is no Posidonia, of course.
I think that for me, but this is focused on places where there's Posidonia, because for me, this is just my own opinion. I don't think that if there's a place that doesn't have Posidonia, you will have to put money to actually conduct not restoration, but let's say transplantation. And why, especially with this species, the rate of success of replantation are super low. And I think that especially in places that, for example, they historically there's no seagrass there, probably the rate is going to be lower. So I wouldn't think that like the thing that what I'm presenting today is targeted to those places. It's just, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's go to Kayla. I will conclude.
I have a question. How do you determine this code?
This is from a
Okay.
yeah. Thank you. We're given that this is from a paper, and actually those are the normal values in Europe for beach replenishment. Sometimes it can go up to 34 euros, but that was like an extreme situation, so that's why I took it.
Why are they vary? What is different between them?
Where they extract the sand from. So if it's, for example, places that are really offshore or far away, and they have to do like they have to transport it farther away, the cost is gonna be high.
Okay, so it's mainly transportation.
Exactly, transportation, or like if there's not enough sand to replenish that specific coast, then it's also gonna be higher than the cost.
I give back the call in a minute, but as we're talking about that, so here it's millions of dollars, euros
Yeah.
a year for 1 unique cubic meter of sand. Oh,
No.
it's a beach cost per cubic
Yeah,
meter.
yeah.
So
So it's,
cubic meter.
but it's not millions. It's like if beach replenishment costs 5 euros per cubic meter, this will have an avoided cost of 6 million
It's a
euros.
different scenarios.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I didn't get
I
it.
went-
Okay. But then, so it will mean that, generally speaking, we're talking about around 5 euros per cubic meter.
Exactly.
Do you have an estimate? That was my follow-up question. That on square meter of beach,
How?
because initially you showed us like a very impressive pictures of houses falling in the sea.
Mhm.
And so, you know, like
Yeah.
if it's 1 cubic meter on the beach or on the cliff.
Yeah, I think that I don't have that value, but I think that it's also case specific because beach replenishment also relies on where you put the sand. So if it's in front of the beach or if it's in the cliff or like, and regarding what are you targeting, that will be the amount of sand that you will need to actually put in that area.
It's a general estimate.
Exactly. Mhm.
Yeah, again.
I'm trying because it was a lot of information. Let me. If you have another question, go. Yeah.
Yeah, coming back to maybe also a question of Hubert, it was also a question. I had so 53 sources, 25 interns read, 16 selected, and then you turn that into 9 recommendations. 9.
Exactly.
Maybe I missed that, but it's exactly how you turn that information from your 16 paper into
These conditions.
Yes, it means like how many times you were reading something there and you turn, I would like to have an idea of how many times you've seen this topic, this concept in how many papers, so that you selected these different elements in your protocol and why you say, okay, those 5 ones are the most important. Why? Because they have been seen more often on the papers you read.
Okay, so to actually propose this condition, that's why I did that, the matrix of questions and answers. So I might have a picture for that, but anyway, so it was like I set some questions and then let's say I was reading the first paper. So after I finish the first paper, I will go to this matrix and I will, okay, I have an answer for this, I have an answer for this, I have an answer for this.
Can you have an example?
Yeah. It's kind of
Sorry, 235.
yeah, no. Okay, let's say. So, for example, I use my categories, blah, 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 and then I'd say, okay, what is the maximum depth at which seagrasses can still help prevent coastal erosion? So I don't have a maximum depth, right? But what I do have is like, okay, if the meadow is located farther away from where the energy that is coming with the wave can reach, then the meter is not gonna be able to attend with that. I got that from a paper, so I answered that from paper number 1. Then I went and I read the paper number 2. And I have the same answer, right? So I put it next. And at the end, when I finish my internship, I end up with tons of columns with the same answers from different papers.
That was my point. So I try to keep in mind my second question that I'm going to forget. But on that, do you have a kind of a heat map or something? That was my point. Can you give us a kind of a quantification on how much the papers answer these questions? How much you are sure about, how much you know that these conditions are more important, or where we will need more research?
Okay. I don't have an number, but that's a great point. I think that I did it more visually, let's say. And also what was more clear for me, because all the papers that I read were related to coastal engineer. I'm not an engineer. So if I actually understand a concept, it means that I read it in 10 papers, let's say. So I did it more maybe subjectively speaking. Of course, this can be another limitation.
Yeah, but it would be very nice, I think, even to publish, to go for publication, to spread that to the community.
Yeah.
But for that, I think you will need to be able to quantify a bit more.
Yeah.
Coming back on my first question, and I'm surprised, I think I remember it. No, come back to the slide. So your method was to try to answer these questions with the papers, but how did you end up with these questions?
Because like I think that it was maybe because the topic was super new for me. So I didn't know anything. And as I said, I don't know anything about physics. So while I was reading, I had to stop several times, but let's say in the first paragraph, I will stop like 6 times. And I was like, okay, I don't understand this. Okay, I don't. So it's hard to actually present this topic because for me, it's not like I follow a super structured methodology. It was just like me going around and traveling and like getting in trouble and like having a thought that I don't understand and coming back. So I think that's how I end up with this question, like me having discussion with myself and also with Timothy. I invent that.
Sorry about that.
Because of this methodology.
Thank you for exchanging on that journey. Okay, it's interesting. So I understand it's not possible to currently, with the limitations we have generally, to go full scale with applying that on the full Mediterranean scale. But do you have examples where it works, where it can work, like examples where as a dev, I don't remember, is good and where it's not good? Do you have examples where you can use these indications?
And now just know my question.
I think that maybe test them, yes. The outcome might be, okay, Posidonia here is actually not helping a lot in wave attenuation, but at least they can be used as a preliminary tool to say if Posidonia is useful or not. I think that the group that I use, I will say that they can actually assess it's already a hotspot for erosion, but they can actually assess how much they are attenuating with this with the seabed that is located there. And why? Because they already have the distribution of Posidonia, they have the depth, they have the amount of sediments that Posidonia actually traps. So basically I think that they will be able to.
Do you have other examples? Maybe you can tell me no, and that's it. But if you try to apply in other places.
I don't know. To be honest, I don't know, because I will have to know specific cases in the Mediterranean coast in France. But to be honest, I don't.
Okay, so it remains to be done. So it was a very interesting methodological approach to create a tool that now it would be nice to try to apply. Okay. And so you go, I think, somewhere here to 4.8 thousand per hectare per year in euros, I guess. Okay. And this is only for avoided cost again, just to make sure.
The avoided cost, not the ecomarine part.
Okay. So the next step again. So we are going to next step to try to apply, and if it works, the next step, what would it be like for for a stakeholder like seeds, or how will it be to apply that for really conservation? It means you go with this number to the different stakeholders, to the decision makers, and you put it on the table. Okay, if you do not protect Posidonia, you're going to lose 5,000.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, basically the idea is to show a value. Because you can always say, yeah, Posidonia is protecting your coast. But what does it mean? In what extent? And how much actually in money that is representing? So I think that for blue seeds, let's say, in places where they're actually today, they don't have protections to Posidonia, like ecomarine zones or other protections to Posidonia, they can, if they want to conduct a project that wants to look at how they can implement conservation measures there, the first step will be say, okay, I think that you need to protect the species because basically they are saving you money. And if you don't do it, well, that's gonna happen.
Okay.
If I can comment, what is your feeling concerning this number?
I think that, I mean,
It's a lot, it's not a lot.
per hectare, it doesn't seem a
Per
lot.
hectare of Posidonia or
Per hectare of Posidonia. It doesn't sound a lot, but then when you look at as a beach, which this is a beach of 5 kilometers, 5.7 kilometers, it's around this per year. So I think that it's pretty.
It's a beach of 5 kilometers.
5.7, yeah.
But we refer that, as you're talking about per hectare of Posidonia, it means that you have Posidonia all along the beach.
Yeah, was one of my limitations, that I considered that the Posidonia that was there was actually protecting the whole coast.
Okay.
So now we have to test it with actually the amount of shoreline that is protected.
We're scratching on that. Following it, I'm sorry, a bit. 4,000 hectares, 4,000 euros per hectare and per year.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. I'm a decision maker, so no. Okay, 4,000 hectares. Dollars, euros. Hectares per year. Okay, it's money I could lose, but how much does it cost? Your measures of protection. What if? Are you sure? Have you tested? Have you quantified? So is the measures of protection that we will need to protect this Posidonia, because these numbers will only work if to convince them to protect Posidonia that generate this affected cost, they don't have to pay more.
Yeah, but that's why I included the part of the ecomarine zone.
Yeah.
Because for that one, I mean, I didn't take a look at per hectare of Posidonia, but I just took a look regarding the whole model. So for the avoided cost, that's the cost that they're saving, right? But then if they establish 50 buoys of an ecomarine system, it will cost 200,000 per year. So if we compare the cost of this, but then it actually outweighs what they're saving. I don't know if that.
Yeah, for 50 buoys, but will be enough. And alternatively, I guess they will say, if we do not implement this 50 buoys, are we sure that Posidonia will disappear? So
we are not sure, but also this is hard because I mean I can tell them, yeah, we're not sure, but I'm pretty sure that if you don't protect it, then in 20 years you're gonna have this cost. But they don't think about the future. I mean, not everyone, but like most of the time they don't think about it.
That was my point. That's it's not that straightforward, and it's very hard to implement this idea of ecosystem services.
Yeah.
Because of that. You were having more questions, I think. I stopped you.
No, well, it's interesting to give number, but at the end, it's always a question to compare this number with the reality. And
yes.
I'm not sure if it's really impressive. 1 kilometer of motor road, it's 8 million euros, 1 kilometer. So that's what we pay to build just 1 kilometer. We built 100 or 1,000 kilometers. So it's hard it's a very interesting job to give a number to the value of ecological things. This is a lot of number like that. But it's hard sometimes. My feeling it's hard to implement it to the economic reality, and good to try it. And after you have to find a good pitch around that to be convincing. And probably generally people are not very interested about what they are not losing, but they try to earn something. So this is probably the switch to find to be more sexy. But that's
maybe also something related to that is that here most of the avoided costs comes from the cost of replenishment.
Exactly.
But you may not consider all the losses related to the loss of the beach. So I mean, losing economic attractivities, revenues, and all the value chain after that. If you consider all of that, I think it's much higher. So all the indirect costs.
Yeah, definitely. And like, for example, the first picture that I showed, coastal erosion, like it destroys roads. And like in the beach that I'm using in Almana, they have to rebuild the road each year because of coastal erosion. So if we add that value to this, the value, like the avoided cost, will increase.
That could be interesting to compare. And it's also a big change for all the ecosystem services papers from the year 2010 to now, where they consider also the indirect effects. It's to impress people like Hubert, you know, and which it's true, actually. Yeah. Thank you. Putting the floor to questions for the last okay, sorry.
Last question. Do you know a method that could allow you to have quantification and maybe try to address a little bit all the questions that they asked you?
I think that no. But I think that not all, because if you think, like, it's like, for example, me with the question, you can always come up with something new. And so it just can be an endless work, you know, like direct passes and then indirect, and then you jump from more and more and more. So so right now I don't think so. And I think that if you want to include everything, it's not going to be possible.
Don't you think a meta-analysis could help you to address this question, since you consider all these parameters and have a quantification of it?
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, probably. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely.
You have from the start of your study, you just go through literature, try to find papers that are related to what you want to do. It's basically what you do for a meta-analysis. So building from that, you already have a standard procedure that will help you for your arguments afterwards, I think.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea. Thank you.
Something with Amy, Andrea, here.
So I feel like the rules are super interesting with the general parameters, and those are the ones that are defining what Posidonia looks like now. I was curious if you think it could be used to like design restoration efforts to be for wave attenuation. That would be.
For example, one that I found really interesting is this one. This one. Because it shows that, for example, if you have like broken strips and clusters of vegetation, it actually promotes better the attenuation of waves. So you actually don't need like a whole wall of Posidonia in order to improve the wave attenuation. So, for example, if we want to do, like conduct replant or something like that, you don't need to cover all of these spaces, but you can only focus on this. And I think that will be first easy and less time consuming. So yeah, so I think that, yeah, definitely.
For restoration or for selecting places to protect as well. There were Andrea and then Kat.
Thank you for your presentation, Gabi. It was really interesting. I was thinking, you talked a lot about the limitations of your model, but I was actually curious about what you think are the strengths of your model compared to the other model that you.
I think that mine, like, first is the only one that I saw that actually is related to the avoided cost, not to the replacement cost. The other articles focus on that, which is basically how much would it cost to put a dike that attenuates in the same waves as Posidonia does. Mine is mainly focused on the ecological function of Posidonia, so I think that that's one of the strength. And yeah, I think that it's mainly that.
Garland and Lisa, who's waiting. No?
First of all, my condolences for having to read physics and engineering paper. Since Posidonia is in decline in a lot of places, do you think that your model could only become more valuable with time? And therefore, do you think time is a big factor in the valorization of your model?
Yes and no, because I think that right now we are already like in an emergency scenario where we actually need to start protecting the ecosystems, and we still don't care about the information, like some people, not everyone. So I think that even if we jump to 2050, people will gonna say the same. Like, yeah, right now, I mean, yes, they have pollution, but if I protect your plant, tomorrow is not gonna prevent the whole problems that I have right now, you know? So I think that, yeah, it can, for some people, they can right now say, okay, this is important, we need to conserve it. And for the ones that don't, I don't think that in the future, they will change their mind. That's my personal thought.
Perfect, thank you.
That's perfect. Sure. Maybe we can bring Timothée back in the room. Hello back, Timothée. I know if so we are not into the question anymore that are going to be explored by the jury. But if you want to come back on the internship and on the personality of Gabriel.
Thank you. No, listen, this was really a really nice experience. Perhaps to contextualize the project, that Gabriela was really, let's say, foolish enough and brave enough to take, to accept. You know, sometimes you have students or people that come and work on something that's already ongoing. So there's already, let's say, some certainties, some materials, some data, some context, an ongoing or several ongoing projects. There was absolutely nothing here. We just had this idea where, you know, everybody's talking about how Posidonia oceanica protects the coast, right? That's the one thing. On the other hand, the sea levels are rising, and there's this whole issue about, you know, the costs of coastal protection. So, you know, how can we link both through, you know, something that's been tested on mangroves elsewhere with an insurance sort of approach to paying for the conservation of Posidonia through the benefits it provides to society. So that was really it. And so we just threw Gabriela into this thing, you know, and she started from scratch. We had nothing out there, and really, you know, quickly the question was, okay, so everybody's saying that Posidonia protects the coast, but what are your sources? And it turns out that people are saying it's almost like an urban legend, but this one turns out to be true. It's just that people are incapable of explaining it because, simply put, they don't know where that information comes from. And this is because we are mostly ecologists in this room. And even amongst physicists, it's only known to those handful of physicists who are, you know, interested in this question. So Gabriela managed somehow to read these papers, and that was the challenge, was like, if we want to make this into a policy sort of thing, and this was mentioned several times in the room here, is like, how can we convince the decision makers? We have to approach them first in a way where we're sure of ourselves, like we know there's a causal link between this and coastal protection. There's a causality, there is an ecosystem service here that is true. And it's true because this is how it works. And if you're incapable of explaining it or citing the papers, anyways, so this is what Gabriela did, and she established these set of rules, which I found super interesting because I had no idea how it worked. These sets of rules, these set of conditions, and you know, also she did a super good job at building this avoided cost model. So I think we're a lot stronger now to approach these decision makers and to explore actual funding mechanisms to use this kind of information to fund the conservation. And I just want to finish on one thing, is that Gabriela cited at the beginning the CEREMA report, which gives a figure of the costs that the society is going to have to bear in the future. And to me, it is absolutely under evaluated. It says like something like 1 billion euros or something for the whole French coastline, and there's no way it's going to be so little. But so I think there's a lot to do here. And thank you for your patience, Christophe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Timothée. No, but it connects, of course, also to, I think, what Kayla and I think I tried to say, like, there is a multiple ways to value your work, whether it's with reports for decision makers, but also as whatever a multi-analysis, a review paper, or a paper where you can quantify really these different indicators with the literature. It can strengthen that and demystify the urban legend.
And also help to understand just to have a clear protocol on how to do it, and because it's already something done from the meta-analysis.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gabriela. And just well, I think. Okay, it's the end of our first day of presentation. Congratulations to those of you who are in holiday, and see you tomorrow starting at 8:30. We'll be happy to be with Valérie, Astrid, and Océane for a session about predators, ecology, and anthropogenic interactions. Bonne soirée à tous. Demain.